Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We are here, the clergy team in the Rabbi Chill Sanctuary, recording on Wednesday afternoon, March 26th. Dear colleagues and dear friends online, the question we want to tackle today is we are assaulted every day by headlines that break our hearts. We encounter headlines that break our hearts in Israel every day, in Gaza every day, in America so much every day, throughout the world every day. And Pesach, the Seder, the first Seder is Saturday night, April 12th. It's a little bit over 2 weeks from now. It's going to be 2 weeks from when this is being shown. And the question I want to pose very simply is, should our Seders be timeless or timely? Should we invite the headlines that break our hearts to our Seders? Should the stories that cause us angina in Israel, in America, in the world, should those stories, should those headlines be a part of our Seders? Or do we say, no, that's the world, we're not letting that enter. We're going to be in a more rarefied world. We're going to talk about the Exodus. We're going to sing songs. We're going to read prayers. We're going to do children's skits. We're going to do children's stories. We're going to talk about our own personal lives. We're going to eat great food. We're going to drink great wine. We're going to sing beautiful songs. We're not allowing the headlines to infect our Seder table. And that is the question. Timeless or timely? Are headlines welcome or not welcome at our Seder? So let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu u'b'fi amcha beit Yisrael. V'niyeh anachnu v'tzatza'enu v'tzatza'ei amcha beit Yisrael. Kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai hamelamed Torah la'amo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
So colleagues, we've got this question about our headlines invited to our Seder table. Should our Seders be timeless or timely and urgent? And obviously every family, every person will come up with their own thinking on that. What I wanted to do in today's class is offer our learners 4 different lenses to help you think about it. The first lens is going to be from a beautiful poet named Mary Oliver, who is an American poet. She won a Pulitzer Prize. She's a very lauded poet, born in 1935. She passed away in 2019. Mary Oliver wrote a poem called Don't Hesitate, which is on page 4 of our pamphlet. And Elise, I was wondering if you'd be kind enough to read Don't Hesitate by Mary Oliver.
If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate. Give in to it. There are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed or about to be. We are not wise and not very often kind, and much can never be redeemed. Still, life has some possibility left. Perhaps this is its way of fighting back, that sometimes something happens better than all the riches or power in the world. It could be anything, but very likely you notice it in the instant when love begins. Anyway, that's often the case. Anyway, whatever it is, don't be afraid of its plenty. Joy is not made to be a crumb.
Thank you, Lisa. So let's first talk about what this poem means in its pshat, in its own context, and then we can ask what it might say to our Pesach Seder. What is Mary Oliver saying in this poem? Michelle?
It's so beautiful, Wes. I love that you love this poem and that you brought it to us because it names something that's really true. There is plenty in this world to cause us grief and pain. And when we have the opportunity to feel joy, we have to amplify that, because too often we'll allow ourselves just a little bit, just that crumb of joy. And, it's gorgeous here how she says, if you're feeling it a little, amplify it, go into it, lean into it, make it more, because we need more.
Right. In other words, to kill the metaphor, joy is not meant to be a crumb, it's meant to be a main course. Yeah. Have a 4-course meal of joy, not just a crumb. And do that even though, to quote her, there are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed or about to be. In other words,
or even especially so because of that.
Right. You know when you're feeling joy. You know when you're drinking your wine. You know when you're eating your plentiful food. You know when you're singing your songs. You know when you're seeing the cutie pie kids do their cutie pie things, that all around this world, people are suffering and dying. And yet, she's saying, don't hesitate. We might hesitate, don't hesitate. What do you guys think of that message?
I find the metaphor of joy is not made to be a crumb to be fascinating, because you could imagine it like it should be an entree. But you could also imagine it like the leftover crumb that's on the table after you finish a big meal. And I think
that's the best part.
Yeah.
I think that joy and sadness, like sometimes we feel like if you're not feeling the grief and the intensity of the world, like you've deprived the world of something, and they're bigger than meals, right? It's not like you're going to fill up your stomach on joy and not be able to feel the grief that's around you. Like, we're capable of more than that. It's more than food.
It feels very, very Rebbe Nachman of her, right? In the sense of that, like, we know there are going to be moments of profound sadness, and there's so much that threatens to overwhelm us at any time, and almost like it's a mitzvah to, I mean, she doesn't say mitzvah,
right,
obviously, but it's a mitzvah to try to cultivate that sense of joy amidst that.
Right.
Yeah, can I apply it to Passover?
Yeah, but please do.
So I like this poem a lot, and I would say that that's pretty much the way I approach and my family approaches the seders, like this, with happiness. You know, there are again, you said it so beautifully, and but there are so many things to be happy for. You know, Passover, it's a holiday where most of the time you reunite with your loved ones. And, you know, your kids are coming back from college, or your parents or grandparents are traveling, and you get together, and so much joy just by that. You know, if we are all healthy and we are all together.
So let me ask this question, Elias. If all we do is the joy, the different generations that don't see each other coming together, the warmth, the connection, the family tradition, if all we do is the joy, and we don't engage that there are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed or about to be, are we doing our job, Jewishly speaking? Is that actually fulfilling the mandate of the Seder? It is a party. There are 4 cups of wine. 4 cups of wine are to, make you feel really happy. You're singing Hallel. You're singing. There's a lot of beer songs at the end, right? If we just shut out the pain of the world and enjoy the loved ones, friends, family, generations, are we doing our job?
So I think my answer, you started by asking me. You want to talk?
No, Elias, go ahead.
Okay. So
is that a dare? Do you want to talk? Are you interrupting me?
Elias, I didn't know it. So to me, always Pesach has been, a beautiful celebration, a beautiful story about the Exodus. And obviously, in my family, we focus a lot on the music, not so much in the bringing topics for discussion. I think that the rituals of the Seder are so beautiful by themselves that we don't need to add a special conversation to talk about how crappy the world it is. And we as Jews do that all the time. We don't need the Seder specifically to be talking about that. That is my approach.
There. And yet it actually is within the Seder. When you do Shvo Chamatcha and you open up your door and yell out, this is awful, there is a moment for that. Right. And there is a moment for suffering. Sorry, Dan.
I was going to say, the poet actually brings it to our attention. When she says there are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed, we are not wise, we are not very often kind. So, in other words, she's saying that, yes, we lean into the joy, but at the same time, we do simultaneously, living on the tightrope, we recognize that there is also not joy in the world at the same time. So we're living both.
Sort of like the song, Lo alecha mamlecha litmor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I was going to say also, we do this every Shabbat. We have a joyous bat mitzvah coming up. We have a joyous baby naming coming up, and we recognize we lean into the joy every Shabbat, and then we also, oftentimes the Divrei Torah, the sermons are pointed at the difficulties happening in the world. We end every service with Hatikva. So we are doing the joy and leaning into the joy, and we are simultaneously not locking out the rest of the world.
And I think about the Seder itself, which begins with the idea of let all who are hungry come and eat. You're naming that actually there is suffering out there in the world, and we have a responsibility and a relationship to that suffering, and yet it doesn't diminish the joy we can
Right.
create.
Okay, so it feels like there's an emerging consensus here that much can never be redeemed. Much is broken, was broken, will be broken, and we will, despite that, live and feel our joy. It's not a crumb; it's a main course. Okay, I want to just juxtapose that against a text from the Haggadah itself. This comes from the New American Haggadah, which is now not so new anymore. It was written, edited by Jonathan Safran Foer, and translated by Nathan Englander in 2012. So it's now kind of a middle-aged Haggadah, but it's a really good Haggadah. And my favorite part of this Haggadah is the commentary on the line, "And the Lord heard our voices," as it is written, "And God heard their wailing. God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And the questions pivot around the fact, what does it mean that God remembered? Did that mean that God had forgotten? What did it mean that the people had to complain and moan and groan? If they hadn't, would God not have responded? What's the function of protest and complaining, etc.? There's a bunch of commentary. I want to ask Michelle to read the one on page 9 of the handout by Nation. It's called Nation, but Nation actually is Jeffrey Goldberg. And Jeffrey Goldberg was a journalist who was included in that famous war plan, who's been in the news for 2 or 3 days. But before then, he wrote this. So if you could read this, please.
God forgets. A shocking idea. God chose us and then forgot us. Only by wailing did we remind God of our existence. But God's problem is our problem as well. We're masters of forgetting about prejudice and unfairness, wars and genocide, hunger and misery. We're busy. We're overwhelmed. We're callous. So what reminds us of injustice in the world? Wailing, protest, complaining. Suffering in silence is not a Jewish virtue. Complaining is a Jewish virtue. Should we just stop there?
No, keep going. No, keep going.
Because dissatisfaction is a particularly Jewish characteristic.
So let's pause there, right? Jeffrey Goldberg, in this verse that God heard our cries, points out that crying and protesting and dissatisfaction is a quintessentially Jewish virtue, which is to say that if you were to take his comment seriously, a Seder without any protest, without any dissatisfaction, it's lovely, it's pleasant, who doesn't want that, right? But it's an abdication. He's saying that a Seder shouldn't only be easy, that a Seder to be really fulfill its objective is to ask us to encounter the world as it is, the gap between the world as it is and it should be, the work that needs to get done, what are we going to do that work? All of that is a whole different, that's not just the joy that Mary Oliver invited us to think about. That gets you into unpleasant headlines. So what do you think about that?
I don't know. I think he's expanding the category of joy. He's actually saying that as a Jewish people, we temperamentally are oriented towards noticing the world around us and speaking up out of that. And it is in that speaking up and in that sense of outrage that we express that we may experience a deep joy of meaning.
But if you take the word outrage seriously, and if you take the outrage behind outrage seriously, then there is something grievously wrong with the world which we're dissatisfied about, and we're protesting. The Israelites protested slavery. We're protesting whatever it is that's causing us outrage. That's not joyful. That's not just enjoying your grandmother or your grandchild. That's like That's like a different palette on the emotional scale. So I guess my question is, how do you square the Jeffrey Goldberg voice with the Mary Oliver voice? How do you square the job of being dissatisfied with the job of being joyful?
So I think there's an interesting conflict between the complaining of what once was and the complaining of what is. And I think it's particularly acute when you have, as many people have, small children around the table, because it's a lot easier to bemoan and complain and cry out about 430 years of slavery long ago and the story and get kids into the story than it is to go into what's happening in Israel or what's happening in Ukraine or in sub-Saharan Africa or with the US AIDS kits. It's much harder to go into that with kids. And I'm not sure, like, what's your objective here? Is our objective to create change through complaining, or is our objective to soften our hearts? And if it's to soften our hearts, I'm not sure that the historical story doesn't do that. But if it's to create change, I'm also not clear that getting everyone around the table deeply depressed about what's happening does that. And I think the most effective protest happens when you're doing so in front of someone who has political power and agency. And I'm not sure that our Seder table, I'm not sure they're not, but that's a real question that I have.
I happen to to agree with you, Alisa. I think that the Seder itself, whoever puts together the rabbis, the sages, did so beautifully that by going through the rituals and the steps of the Seder, you have all the emotions there. You have everything. I believe I don't need to add anything else. Yes, there are places in the Agada where we talk about slavery, where we talk about different things, bad things that happen. Usually we have that part in Amin that it's so beautiful, and it's sad at the same time. Traditionally, the Seder is supposed to be only the steps, okay? And if you analyze other Jewish holidays, we can be having deep discussions about that in the middle of it. Can you imagine stopping in Purim in the middle? So let's have a discussion about the world because Haman was oppressing the Jews
wait a
and they were
minute.
there.
But that's literally what we do.
So
can
what
I-
I'm saying,
Yes.
well, let me finish. I'm not mocking anything, and I'm not trying to destroy your theory, but I have a particular vision of Passover and the way I do it and I celebrate it that doesn't align with that.
Great. I mean, there's 70 faces of Torah. I'm sure there are 70 seders. But I just wanted to zoom out. I grew up on a Maxwell House Haggadah Seder, where the idea of a Seder was you read the Haggadah. You just read the words. And it was, it was a different generation. The guys were mostly reading the words, mumbling. The women were mostly getting the food ready. That's what I grew up with. And it wasn't about a conversation at all. It was about just making sure that the guys read all the words, okay? And lovely, I grew up with it. That was the Seder of my youth. For years, I have felt and taught here that the purpose of a Seder is not to read every word. It is to have a conversation that are inspired by some of the words and to really elicit people's feelings about the world and their relationship to it. It's about the conversation and engagement and using the text as a springboard to talk about what's real now and what I'm going to do about it. So if people's view of a Seder is it's about the music, God bless. And if people's view of a Seder is it's about reading every word of the Hebrew, God bless. For years, everybody makes fun of my Seders because we do so little actually of the Haggadah. It's a minimum of the text and it's a maximum of conversation about some of the text. But if you're going to think about what the Seder and those ancient texts mean to us, then I just have a question about how you are just totally feel good in this moment, much as I would be tempted to be feel good in this moment.
So I grew up in a Seder where they took literally the idea of the need for a reminder that it is time for Kriyat Shema in the morning. So all of the things, all the Hebrew, all the music, all the discussion. And in that, I have to agree wholeheartedly with you, Elias. The text itself provides you with every emotional note that you could need. If you simply do what the Seder asks of you, like Harei Ze Meshubach, that is good in and of itself. And right? I also can't ignore the fact when I went to my bookshelf to find seders and Haggadot that I have. Here we have a Haggadah supplement for economic justice. Here we have a woman's seder. Here we have the survivors Haggadah. And here we have
The
a
October
rich,
7th
correct,
Haggadah,
the October 7th,
the
on and
hostage
on.
Haggadah, the hostages who got back home have a new Haggadah. So they
Correct.
have all used those Haggadot, thank you, Michelle, to talk about how those ancient words apply to all these modern issues.
Right, and these Haggadot are what they're saying is that your Seder is actually a technology to engage not only ancient themes but also the relevant themes of today.
Right, literally the hostages who have returned in the last few weeks now have a new Haggadah. Michelle Tzion has written about it,
So,
which
Wes,
means that
I wanna
that's
ask you a
not
question.
all joy. That's dealing with some opposite of joy.
Yeah,
Yes.
my question is, what's your take on don't hesitate? Because based on what we are feeling here, you are more sided, with the discussion and not so much about the happy.
So I love the title "Don't Hesitate" because it speaks to the instinct within us, precisely to hesitate. Because how can we feel joy when there's so much brokenness in the world? And her response is, and in another famous Mary Oliver poem, she talks about you only go around once. This is the only life you've got. And you might as well feel joy now because when you die, you won't be feeling joy. So do it now while you're still alive. That's especially in her poem, The Summer Day. What will you do with your one wild and precious life? So I'm very much enamored of her question. I like her answer. I find that it's a wise human answer. I find that it's not terribly consistent with some Jewish values and some Jewish texts, like that articulated by Jeffrey Goldberg, or like those by the Haggadot Michelle was kind enough to bring here, which connect the Seder to modern problems. I want to bring in another issue in how you think about this, which is this year, of course, Pesach starts on Saturday night. So there's been a whole lot written and asked about, oh my God, what do we do? Is our food supposed to, when do we do the Biur Chametz? When do we do B'dikat Chametz? When do we do Biur Chametz? Is the house supposed to be kosher for Pesach for Shabbos? Am I going to have challah?
Do
All
we
that
eat challah on
stuff.
Shabbat? Yes.
So the answer is we do the Siyum Bechorot on Thursday morning. The answer is
Thank you.
we
Thank
do,
you, Rabbi.
Yes, we do the B'dikat Chametz Thursday night. The
Thank you.
answer is we do the Biur Chametz on Friday. And the answer is your house should be kosher for Pesach on Friday and Shabbos. And the answer is no challah. And the answer is matzah bread, egg matzah. But the David Golinkin teshuva that I sent that makes all that out, he goes on and on and on and on. And although the answer is egg matzah, he offers us 5 different approaches with citations before you get to the egg matzah. And I wanted to zoom out. So here's the question, which is the broader question. What's the relationship between the pain in the world and going from slavery to freedom, the big themes, and halacha and obsessive concern about details? And we have that in lots of areas of Jewish life, but I think it's particularly pronounced with Pesach. Do you eat kitniot? Do you not eat kitniot? How much matzah do you have to eat? What's the quantum of matzah that you have to eat? Matzah shmor or not matzah shmor, egg matzah, not egg matzah, et cetera, et cetera. So that's even before you get to when Passover starts on a Saturday night, et cetera. And my question is, how do you see the relationship between ritual and obsessive compulsive ritual and the big themes of slavery and freedom?
So that just reminded me, I went to a Seder in college with a professor of mine who loved halacha, and they had clocks set up around the room with second hands and posters of each mitzvah and how many seconds you're supposed to fulfill it in and exactly how much. And everyone was not joking. Getting your maror was measure the amount of maror and eat that in this amount of time. It was a totally different experience. But
and what's the meaning of that? What's the meaning? No, that's not a digression. That's the heart of it.
Yes.
What's the meaning making to be made of that?
I want to pivot to one particular mitzvah to address that, because I think that the ritual b'dikat chametz, the search for chametz, and then the recitation that we perform, saying basically like, there might still be chametz in my house, but it's null and void, even if it's there, and even if I didn't remember to sell it, and even if it's under my pillow and I just forgot to do it, doesn't count. It is null and void. And I think that is the power of real halacha, in that we can't fix the world's problems and we can't actually solve the things that hold us back. I grew up with I think the opposite Seder that you did, which was totally personally relevant. We read a very, very small portion of the Seder itself, but my parents had written this entire Haggadah that was about personal freedom and about releasing yourself from the things that hold you back. And it was this journey of liberation throughout the Seder. And at the end of the Seder, we literally burned our sins, whatever was holding us back, and you emerge into the new year feeling empowered to become your best self. And I found it to be a very powerful, I'm speaking about it a little bit mahingly, but I think it's actually a powerful model. And I think that's the power of the Seder, which is to say, you can do all of these things and you can follow them exactly. And if you do that, there's a kind of liberation that happens even despite the fact that the world's problems still exist.
Wow.
Yeah.
Elias, what about
Thank
you
you.
on halacha details?
Yes. So I think that, some famous rabbis once said, yes, and, so yes, and I think
That was Michelle and me.
There you go.
I taught it to her, but keep going. I digress.
I think that halacha, to me, halacha, the way I see halacha, it's what unites us. All right, that's who we are. That's who we are, not only as human beings, but as Jews. All right, there are certain rules and certain traditions that we follow no matter what. So the fact that the world could be falling apart or the world is the most beautiful place, the opposites, that go together with the halacha. It's not that we do either one or the other. Not because the world is falling apart, I'm not going to do halacha because it's meaningless. It's not. I don't see it that way. I see it that's who we are, but there is place for both. Yes, and.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that. So you guys are going on the March of the Living, and we think about the power that ritual and halacha had for many people in the camps, that they did everything they could to try to perform any of the mitzvot. They tried. There was seders inside concentration camps. So yes, I agree, Elias, that the idea that that everything in the Haggadah points us in every possible direction of human emotion, from joy to the deepest emotions of slavery. And I think the idea, Elisa, you pointed out also, that we have the idea that that the Haggadah is something that gives us the strength to understand the past, to relate to the past, and how that past influences our present and our potential future.
I kind of love, so the tshuva, one of the things I love about a good tshuva is that you get all the opinions you don't follow, even though you might say like, ugh, what's the like, what do I do? What do I eat? Like, just give me the answer. But in the exploration, I love the discussion in Psachim, I think it is, about that we shouldn't eat matzah before it's actually Passover, and that there's this idea that you don't Mary Oliver Passover, right? You don't expand your suffering of having to eat non-leavened bread beyond the bounds of the holiday, even when there's this Shabbat conflict. And that feels like a really important idea to hold, which is to say, even when we don't follow it, the minutia of halacha gives us access to wisdom in our tradition.
Yeah, and also a really beautiful model that I think in so many ways in our modern American moment right now, we could really use, which is, I'm going to tell you 5 things that we don't follow and all of the reasons behind them and all of the possibilities. And I'm going to entertain the idea that there might be an idea that this one approach has that would be valuable, even if it's not the one I'm going to go with. And I'm going to patiently and respectfully give each position its due, because that ultimately helps me come out in the end with not just egg matzah, but like, how do I find the right thing that meets each of the goals that had been trying to be reached by each of those other positions?
Amen. So say praise.
Yeah, I want to name, before we leave ritual and go to our last lens, I want to name one other thing about ritual, which to me is very, very deep and very mysterious, which is that when there are big problems that are painful, that we cannot solve, that don't admit of a solution, somehow allowing us to focus on rituals which are more small and more granular and more within our control helps us feel better. Like, we can't solve those problems, but we can solve these little ritual problems, makes us feel better. So the classic example of this is that people who otherwise never ask me, can I do this, can I do that, should I eat this, should I eat that? I've never in my life gotten a call saying, is swordfish kosher? I mean, nobody ever does that, right? But people who never ask about anything will ask me, how long do I say Kaddish? Is it for 30 days or is it for 31 days? Is it for 11 months or is it for 11 months? Can I say Kaddish for my grandmother? Can I say Kaddish for my mother-in-law, for my father-in-law? I just finished saying Kaddish for my wife, which is only 30 days, but I'd feel like I'd like to say Kaddish for more. Can I do that? And then can I go to the movies? I'm within the 11 months. Can I go to a party? Can I actually have fun? What's the law? Can I get a haircut? All these questions, and nobody ever asks those kinds of granular questions. But when people face grief, when they face death, which is endless and inchoate and impossible to assimilate, you can't actually answer that, but you can answer how many days do you say Kaddish and what are the granular laws. And I think there is something about that is going on with Pesach, because slavery and freedom, the ways in which people are subjugated and constrained, the brokenness is just so real and so hard to admit of a solution. But am I supposed to eat egg matzah or some other kind of matzah? That's a nice granular thing. Or can I have hummus? Or can I just, I'm switching teams. I'm switching to the Sephardi team. Can I have rice? What does that mean? Can I now have rice? And do I need to get this rice need a hashgacha for Passover? All those kinds of granular questions are just safe and much easier to deal with than the brokenness in the world. So that I think is something that ritual does for us generally, and particularly on Pesach. Last thing, the last text is just the text from Liz Wiseman, who wrote a great book called Multipliers, and in it she talks about the power of questions. And I'll just read this thing and offer it up to you. A bad leader will tell people what to do. A good leader will ask questions and let his or her people figure out the answers. A great leader asks the questions that focus the intelligence of their team on the right problems. The first step in this journey is to stop answering questions and begin by asking them. And then she, in her book Multipliers, she has this great passage about the ultimate questions challenge, which is she has young children, and her job, she's challenged by a colleague to get your kids to bed without any periods, without any statements, without any exclamation marks, but entirely through the power of questions. Like, hey kiddos, what time is it tonight? And what do you think we should be doing now? And what do you think that means? And what does brushing your teeth involve? And by asking all these questions, she inspires her young children to do their bedtime ritual by themselves without ever being told what to do. So anyway, the power of questions. So, and it's a night of questions, obviously. What's the resonance of her wisdom on questions as you think about
So
Seder?
I was thinking for that. I was reading that vignette, and I don't agree at all with that. I don't agree with all. I had, my kids are grown up now, but they were toddlers, and yeah, somebody can
I think
identify with that.
I think the
but-
train's going off the rails here, but keep going.
No. What I'm saying is that there is a point in your life, in general, that you don't need to ask questions anymore, because there was a whole period of your life that you were telling over and over to other people what to do. You know what I mean? In order to not ask questions anymore, is because you order so many times or you say some things. I mean, a kid who is 3 years old, 4 years old, he's never going to come
Right,
and
okay,
say to
so-
you, you're never going to, no, it's time for me to brush my teeth. No, let me finish. Can I finish? That happens because for several months or years, you've been telling that kid, go to brush your teeth. Am I right?
So I was laughing, and I'm sorry for laughing, but my toddler is at a stage where that strategy would provide some very comical answers, and I don't think actually move us towards bedtime. But I was thinking about that, the power of that, because I think that this asking good questions requires that the people that you're asking those questions are able to receive them and able to respond appropriately. And I think Elias is totally right that there is a place for being told. Like, there's a place for halacha, and there's a place for, like, if somebody came to you and said, you know, my loved one passed away, and can I go to this party? And you said back to them, well, what do you think? That's lovely, but that's not actually what they're looking for, right? Like, they're looking for an answer. And so I think that this space of questions and answers is really important. And to say, I don't actually think what we want is to always be asking questions. And I also don't think what we want is to always be telling. I think that's the balance between the two.
And that's what the Seder gets so right. It has such a beautiful balance of the story being laid out, how we should do it, and the halacha coming along with that, what you should do, and should it be kazait, or like what are the different measurements that we have to attain, and all of that. And we have the questions, both the questions that should, in a good conversation, be able to ask people how they're feeling this story that we're telling, this ancient story, speaks to the world that we have now. That's an important question. And the questions that we ask, the 4 questions, I got a sweatshirt for my son that he actually wears not only on Pesach time. It says, I have more than 4 questions, right? And we should create a space for that.
So we can have a discussion another time about this topic, but I'm sorry to disrupt these beautiful feelings of this happy, joyous class. I cannot get out of my mind. I just, hung out the phone with Mikey. Mikey told me today that, again, his professor of economics canceled the class. All right? Again. And in the message, he said, do what is right. To do what is right. All right? I consider that, professors and teachers, and we are leaders. All right? I consider that super bad leadership. When you, first of all, indoctrinate kids because you are telling them what they should think, but also by telling them, we are not doing class because you have to stand up for what is right.
Right. So let me just close by saying, I, in my own mind, saved the best for last, because I think this wisdom from Liz Weissman about questions is the most powerful single idea in this packet. It's, of course, the case that she's not advocating, I'm not advocating that you only have one punctuation mark, which is a question mark, and that you never have answers. And when someone says, I lost my wife, how many days do I say a Kaddish for? Obviously the answer is not what do you think, but you tell them the answer. Obviously context is always king. But I think that in the story that Elias just told, and so many people have their own versions of that story, I want to close this class by inviting all of you to think about the power of the following question, which is, if Mikey were coming to my Seder, I would say to Mikey, I would love for you to do a teaching. Could you tell us what it was like for you to be at Columbia in the second year post-October 7th? And what wisdom have you gotten from this? How have you grown from this? And what does what's happening on the Columbia campus teach us all? And could you share with us your questions, and could you share with us your thinking? And I think asking people, so I began by asking timeless or timely, do we invite the headlines in or do we not invite the headlines in? And it's clear that it's a yes and everybody has at least 2 good answers to that. But for my money, the best answer to that is I invite everybody who comes to our Seder. I reach out to them weeks ahead of time and say, we'd love you to teach what's ever on your mind. What is on your mind? What are you thinking about? And what do you think about what you're thinking about? And would you teach us what you think about what you're thinking about? And that is a question that never goes out of style. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.